Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Strengthening the K-12 STEM Teacher Pipeline in California webinar. My name is Mary Briggs. I'm an Education Policy Analyst at CSBA, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to make a few quick announcements. If at any time you have a question for the presenter or a technical issue, please use the Questions tab of your GoToWebinar dashboard. This is located on the side of your screen, but if you don't see the webinar dashboard, it may be collapsed. What you'll do is look for an orange arrow in the top right corner of your screen, click on that orange arrow, and it will expand to the dashboard. So at this time, I would like to introduce you to our presenter. Our presenter today is Eric Hoyer. Eric will be discussing some of the short and long-term strategies that LEAs can use to increase the recruitment and retention of STEM teachers. He will highlight successful in-state and out-of-state programs that seek to grow their own teacher pipelines. And finally, he will provide some questions that board members can ask to address shortages within their own LEA. And with that, let's hand it over to Eric.
Thanks, Mary. Welcome, everyone. I hope everybody is staying safe during this time. I want to definitely thank Mary from the Policy and Programs Department and Bella and Nessa in the Communications team for putting together this webinar, as well as the SD Bechtel Jr. Foundation, who supported this work, along with my stint at CSBA for 18 months supporting work into the math and science standards in California. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So today our goals are going to be to talk a little bit about the extent of the teacher shortage in STEM, the contributing factors to the recruitment and retention issues faced by LEAs, discuss some promising strategies and policies, and pose some questions for board members. And I think as we kind of go along, you'll see that the shortage in STEM teachers is really a subset of the larger teacher shortage problem. There's some specific areas that we can attend to, but it's in the main, when we talk about teacher shortage, a lot of the strategies and policies that researchers and advocates have been calling for apply in the STEM cases. And the strategies and policies are going to be both local, to LEA, state, and also federal as well. And so this webinar is really intended to be kind of a broad overview to kind of get you thinking. There will be there's an associated brief with the webinar that will be out later this year, and then there's a resources page at the end that has material for further study. So let's move to the next slide. And just to get a sense of the audience, I'd really like to hear from you and ask about your district size and your role at the LEA. So we're going to open up a poll here. Okay, great. Okay, close that poll, and then this is our population for today. And then to ask about your role at the LEA, I'm going to launch another poll. Tell me what your role is. Okay. And share that. So mainly board members. Okay, great. Okay, so then we can move to the next slide there. So to start off, a good question, I think with any kind of presentation is why? Why STEM? Why are we concentrating on STEM? And one answer to this is the growth rate of jobs in this area. If we look at the projected growth rates for STEM occupations, some of them are quite substantial. The biggest one being mathematical science occupations. This tracks from 2014, was projected in about 2014, 2015 through 2024 by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is national. And so this biggest category here covers areas like math teachers, statisticians, data scientists, systems design and research, industrial engineering, operations, and supply chain management. And then you have a lot of demand also for post-secondary teachers in STEM, as well as computer occupations. Okay, move to the next slide. And one thing about STEM jobs is that they require a higher level of education. If you look on the right, this graph for all occupations, the teal and the kind of dark yellow represent jobs that you can get by with no formal education or a high school diploma. But if you look at STEM occupations, that large green band is bachelor's degrees, that blue band is doctoral degrees. And so you can see that over 90% are going to require some kind of college degree, whether it's an associate's, bachelor's, or higher. Okay, next slide. We can move the bullet on that. Okay, so these are the fastest, if we just switch to California, the California view, the top fastest growing jobs from 2016 to 2026. This was done this year by the Employment Development Department for our state. And as you can see, a lot of these jobs have STEM components: healthcare practitioners, construction and extraction, general business operations managers, business and financial specialists, computer and math jobs, healthcare support jobs, software development, app developers, and registered nurses. And a lot of these have higher than average, or higher than the median state salaries. I think by one estimate, the state median is about $64,000 currently, and so some of these are quite well-paying. To the next slide. Even if we're not concentrating on STEM jobs particularly, we will need a lot of bachelor's degrees by the time, we need it now, but we will definitely need by 2030. The Public Policy Institute of California estimated that we'll be short 1.1 million jobs in 2030 that require bachelor's degrees. And those bachelor's degrees will require a background in STEM, whether at the high school level or the college level. They will need to have those skills, even though their majors or professions may not be in a STEM job themselves. And and so you can see here on the right that the demand is going to be outweighing the supply. That equals about 1.1 million when you scale up the population, what is estimated at for 2030. And one kind of question you may have about this, well, what about foreign workers? California uses a lot of H-1B visas, and even by what our kind of current use of that is, we will blow past that. So foreign workers will not suffice. I think even if we had a more expansive immigration policy, we need Californians with bachelor's degrees. Okay, so next slide. So turning to kind of the problem at hand, recruitment and retention of teachers. One of the kind of bigger problems that many of you are familiar with is that for new teachers, roughly a quarter to a half leave within the first 5 years of employment. And the teacher turnover costs are approaching $9 billion annually, and that's on a national scale. If we want to move the bullets ahead, the next one as well. Okay, there we go. And when we talk about turnover, 67% of turnover is voluntary non-retirement. So this is teachers that are either leaving the profession or leaving the district. We move to the next slide. CSBA did a couple surveys recently, and they found that 75% of districts reported are having a shortage of qualified teachers. And 4 or 5 districts saying the problem has gotten worse in recent years. And when we did a more recent study of human resources staff in districts, 76% of staff saying that they're having teacher shortages. Move to the next slide, we get into the STEM picture a little bit more precisely. If you look at the top 2 lines there, especially the blue bars, we see the turnover rates for STEM teachers over that 2-year period there. It's between 18 and 19% for STEM teachers, and the blue bars represent all teachers. When you add, when you consider just not highly qualified teachers, so in this analysis that means they lack an appropriate subject matter credential for the courses that they teach, the number jumps to 25% for math and over 30 for science. For new hires in STEM, for new hiring teachers, the numbers have been pretty static over the past 5 or so years. We had a bump in 2017-18 for both math and science, and for teachers overall, but it's remained relatively flat. If we look at new hires, oh, sorry, Bella, move this slide. Sorry, that was, I got ahead of myself. So that was the hires in STEM had remained relatively flat. As you can see, that little bump in 2017-18 there. But let's move to the next slide, and then move the bullet ahead as well. Okay, there we go. So these are all new hires from 2002 to 2016. And you can see we had a kind of a high water mark in 2002 and 2016. We kind of are kind of pushing our way back. That little red line there just shows where we are now. It's just over 20,000 for 2021, 2020 and 2021 school year. And just as a frame of reference, 2004 is when California schools had peak enrollment. So it was about 6.35 million at that time, and currently I think it's about 6.16 million. Okay, so next slide. So why do teachers leave? And so kind of the non-retirement reasons. So Learning Policy Institute did research on this, and they found that inadequate preparation of novice teachers made these teachers 2.5 times more likely to leave the profession. Lack of support was twice as more likely. Challenging working conditions, so this means lack of principal support. Time for teacher collaboration was often the top reason. Compensation is another one, beginning teachers earning 19% less than their BA holding peers, so either non-teaching peers. And teachers often leave for other opportunities. Okay, so next slide. So why a teacher might return, LPI did analysis on this, and the reasons were salary, smaller class size, about 61% said smaller class size. About 25% each said student loan forgiveness or housing incentives. Retirement portability was another issue, 68%. And the last one is simpler recertification requirements and transfer certification between states, 41% each. I'm not going to go into retirement portability in this presentation. It's a huge issue. I will say that TIAA-CREF does have a teacher retirement model that they've used in other states that allows for some portability if you're interested in that. That is a big one, but I'm not. That's such a huge issue. I didn't think I could cover it in this presentation. Okay, so next slide. So one of the things that you often hear is that teachers don't make enough money, and this is it seems like a chronic issue, and for a lot of time it has been. But if we go back to 1984, teacher compensation nationally was only about 2% behind the average bachelor's degree holder. Today, it's approaching 19%, and this is, this is, nominally based on salary. If we kind of drill down even further, this is wage stagnation is also been persistent. The average worker today makes about the same, has about the same purchasing power that they had in about 1978. Okay, next slide. If we can move the next, and we can move the bullet there. If we look at the STEM picture, teachers compared to STEM professionals, by the time you hit mid-career, there's a 40 to 50% wage premium that STEM professionals who are not teachers are making over their teacher peers. Okay, next slide. So there are obviously constraints in raising compensation. This is a huge issue. One is, of course, the overall funding level for K-12 education. The other is collective bargaining agreements can often limit what differential pay is. If we look at, there was a study done for the Getting Down to Facts 2 report that looked at CBAs, and they found that hiring bonuses for STEM teachers are only specified in 1% of California CBAs. For hard to recruit areas, that's 30%. Now that can include STEM areas, those that wasn't specified out in that study. So that may be a confounding variable there. But special education was definitely called out in about 25% of CBAs as having bonuses for those areas. Okay, moving to teacher preparation. The number of enrolled candidates overall for a while has been on the decline, but we've had a recent bump up. The most current data we have, the CTC puts the number of enrolled candidates at about 25,000. If we move to the next slide, we see that it's been an increase from 2013-14, so it's been an encouraging direction. But if we look at the long-term data since 2002, so moving to the next slide, see on the long term that we've had a high point of nearly 80,000 teacher candidates enrolled in 2002. And again, 2004 is about when we hit peak enrollment in the schools, and we've been, on kind of a decline. And so we've had a bump up, which has been encouraging, but it's nowhere near what it was back in the early aughts. And if for those of you who have been in education in California for some time, you'll remember that the 90s we had a teacher shortage as well as a growing population. So we had to issue a lot of emergency permits and credentials, and a lot of those individuals ended up enrolling in teacher preparation programs, and so that's kind of a residual effect of that surge in the 90s there. Move to the next slide. So for just some STEM specific issues here, there's often an education mismatch between what STEM majors and what are kind of go through, and then the teacher preparation programs, often on the same campus. And I can tell you from somebody that has worked in higher education for 15 years that the culture of STEM departments is really to valorize research and areas and technology in areas where it tends to be higher compensation for STEM degrees. K-12 teaching is something that's usually not valorized unless it's a specific aspect of that school. And so this is a kind of a longstanding issue, and it's kind of hard to kind of attack this. But as I'll kind of mention, towards the end, that this is something that as LEAs often have collaboration with teacher education programs, this is something that that I would ask you to pay attention to, is what, in terms of where are your teacher your teacher candidates, what kind of that want to go into STEM, or how are they educated in their STEM courses, in terms of did they have enough preparation, were they was teaching given as an option. So if we move to the next couple bullets there. So one of the ways that states have tried to kind of address this is by developing programs that have more of a connection between STEM departments and teacher preparation. So one is UTeach, which started at the University of Texas at Austin. And there are affiliate programs for this at UC Berkeley and UC Irvine. But as the UCs don't educate the large portion of our teacher preparation candidates, I think it would be wise to expand a model like this to the CSUs, which do. And this kind of this program, what it does is it gives STEM majors the opportunity to earn a teaching credential in just about the same amount of time as that they would receive their bachelor's degree. And so they get this teacher preparation along with the rigorous coursework that goes along with being a biology or chemistry major. Okay, and then the next slide. So one issue to talk about is credentialing. And credentialing, of course, is ensuring that teacher quality by upholding consistent standards. In our state, there's often cited barriers to credentialing. If we move to the next bullet, which are testing, the paperwork, and this is especially the case for teachers coming from out of state, often are kind of lost in the bureaucratic maze of paperwork, and even just for in-state teachers that are in private school. And then there's also the cost of not only the certification, but the testing that goes along with that. But the need is great. If we move to the next slide, you can see this data is a little old, but the the latest year, which is 2014, 2015, you can see have a decline in preliminary credentials and an uptick in emergency permits. Those numbers about 2014, 15 tend to hold true today, at least for the preliminary credentials. It's about 2,400 when you add the math and the science together. that are issued each year. And just, as a background, interns, when we talk about interns, those are teachers in training. Limited term teacher assignment permits, those are credentialed teachers that are teaching outside of their home subject area. And the provisional permits and the short-term permits, those are one-year permits for somebody without training or subject matter competency. And then the waivers are those kind of last resort, where somebody does not have the training or subject matter competency, but it's just to fulfill that immediate need. And those, even though there's a very limited number, those have been on, I think, grown by 300% over it's about 2014-15. Okay, so the next slide. One area that I'll kind of concentrate on, because there's been some news about it, is testing. And so one of the tests that single subject credential seekers will need to take is the CSET California Subject Examinations for Teachers. Passage rates for these are often low, and they have disparate impacts in STEM areas. For some areas like physical education and music, the passage rates are quite good, and there's minimal disparate impact. But for areas like math and science, they do. So if we move to the next slide, shows you the rates. So for somebody seeking the foundational mathematics, the passage rate is about 50%, and this is data from 2013 to 2015. And often see that Native American candidates, Hispanic candidates, and African American candidates have lower passage rate than white or Asian counterparts. And if we move to the science test, while Native American candidates do quite well, Hispanic and Asian American and African American candidates do not do as well. 42% passing for Hispanic candidates and 29% for African American candidates. So one positive move in this regard, as we move to the next slide, is the consideration of AB 2485. It's under consideration by the Assembly Education Committee, and it would allow candidates to waive the CSET through coursework, subject matter program, or another subject area examination. So if we move to the next bullet there. So, and there's also companion bills for the RECA and then the basic skills exam as well. And so the legislature has decided to kind of move, not wait for the CTC, and to try to get some of these testing requirements waived. And CSBA has not taken a position on this bill in particular, but that you'll have to kind of pay attention to the legislative updates for that. Okay, so moving into strategies and policies, the first one we'll talk about is compensation. And you can skip a couple slides to salaries there. There you go. So this is a chronic issue, but as you've noticed this past year, that there's been more attention paid to this issue. Certainly the number of teacher strikes, but 13 governors have proposed raising teacher pay. Presidential candidates included it in their platform, and so it made a lot of news that way. But it does need a statewide or national solution due to the teacher mobility. We always hear about districts poaching teachers from other districts, offering more money and whatnot. So it does need to be something that is widespread. One kind of avenue that you may not know about is the use of ESSA funds if for high poverty schools, a differential pay to meet need. And the reason being I think this is from an LPI study, is that having teachers that are teaching out of area or don't have adequate preparation is an equity concern. So the next strategy that's often mentioned in research and advocacy is loan forgiveness and grants. The average bachelor's degree holder in California is about $20,000 in debt. For teacher candidates, there's the preparation cost and induction cost. This was about, teacher preparation was about $10,000. Induction is about $5,000. California has had programs that have helped out with loans. APLE, which is in existence for about 20 years, was something that candidates could get about $19,000 in forgiveness. The Carolinas, both North and South Carolina, have had teachers fellows programs that help address this. They get a scholarship towards their BA and credential. They have a 4-year teaching commitment. 70% of the graduates are still teaching after 5 years. For the North Carolina program, 10% of all teachers trained in the state, the retention rate exceeds that of other preparation options. And we used to have something like this as well, called the Governor's Teaching Fellowship, which was kind of a short-lived program in the early aughts. Move to the next slide. So one issue to consider about compensating teachers is compensating them well, but also keeping them in the classroom. This article from Ed Week last year from a middle school teacher says, one quote is that we lack teacher career tracks that compete financially with the lure of becoming a school administrator. In most places now, the pathway to higher compensation eventually leads out of the classroom. And so if we move to the next slide, this is an issue that that we want to retain teachers as mentors. We want to have them be able to work with novice teachers and kind of getting their skills up. And of course, we want good teachers in the classroom. But often is the case is that moving into an administrator track is a more lucrative option. There are other options in other states. There's things called career ladder models. And what they do is they promote mentoring and teacher through incentive pay. So move to the next bullet. And what it does is that it keeps experienced teachers in the classroom. It increases the number of mentors for novice teacher. Rochester and Cincinnati have had long-standing programs. And the other thing is national board certification. And I think about in the CBA analysis that for getting down to facts, I think about 23% of CBAs in California offer some kind of bonus or compensation for national board certification, but that's a nationally recognized program. The cost, I think, is about $1,900 for the certification, but that's another avenue as well. Okay, so we move to preparation, and we can move to the next slide too. Preparation is what, in thinking about this, is that it's like where to get teachers and then how to keep teachers in your district. And one avenue is grow your own. And so what grow your own means is recruiting high school or college students or community paraprofessionals to become teachers. And what this is that it provides support for undergraduate education as well as teacher preparation. This can be tailored or just general or tailored to a specific need. The former California Paraprofessional Teacher Training Program and it targeted bilingual teachers, SPED teachers, or a district and identified area of need. We currently have something called the California Classified School Employee Teacher Credentialing Program. This is the next bullet. And this was started in 2016 and has gone forward. As an out-of-state example, North and South Carolina have something called the Teacher Cadet Program, which starts in high school by students taking a course that transfers to college credit. The South Carolina program has been going on for over 30 years. About 1 in 5 cadets earn a credential, and the cost is only about $100 a student. And so it's a very lauded program. Both of these programs are quite lauded. They're slightly different in North and South Carolina, but the both the results is quite positive. If we move to STEM teacher residencies just in general are ongoing support for bachelor and teacher education in exchange for years of service. And the additional benefits that you typically get in good teacher residencies are more mentoring. It often fulfills a local need, and you often get more diverse teachers if you're getting them from the surrounding area, because these teachers will often stay in that area out of kind of their community ties. Within the state, there's a couple STEM teacher residencies that have been going on. One is the one with between LAUSD and CSU Dominguez Hills called the STAR, and that allows credential seekers to get their single subject credential in a STEM area plus a master's degree, and that's so that's a good kind of urban example. There's a rural example with between Bakersfield and CSU Bakersfield, and this concentrates on elementary STEM. And one of the districts, Kern Union, has been able to retain their graduates, basically 95% of them after 3.5 years. And what this provides is a $30,000 stipend to support them during the program, plus a $4,000 grant on top of that. So, then thinking about more local and regional strategies. We're going to move down to the next one. One is, and this is thinking about retention, is supporting professional learning. I think CSBA has, we've been talking about this for quite a while, and is part and parcel a lot of these resources that we have on STEM on our STEM page. But as we mentioned before, some of the top reasons that teachers leave are inadequate preparation of novice teachers, lack of support, and challenging working conditions. But as we all know, that math and science have newer standards, and those require more professional learning, and so that teachers feel supported and capable in the classroom. One resource that we have on this, if you want to check it out with respect to NGSS, is that we have a new video on our STEM page that talks about deep professional learning with respect to NGSS and what that requires. And the other thing that I'll mention is support from principals, and this requires their own professional learning. WestEd has done a series of reports on NGSS, and particularly one that's called Administrators Matter, and from looking at an early implementation of NGSS in about 10 districts across the state, they found that teachers needed the freedom and needed that support from that principal in order to implement NGSS, basically in order to experiment with those new lessons and that freedom to fail. And that really goes towards feeling that support as an ongoing teacher trying new things. And so I would encourage you that, when you're thinking about professional learning, it's not just about teachers, it's also about having principals that kind of understand what teachers are going through and can give that support and that kind of that freedom to try and kind of promoting a positive STEM culture on campus. The other thing is collaboration with teacher preparation programs as a strategy. Teacher preparation programs are a source of data. They know who your future teachers are. And talking with the faculty, at your local teacher prep program, they should have a good idea as what candidates that go through their program expect as teachers. I think one of the things that the research kind of emphasizes is that oftentimes when teachers feel teachers leave or teachers are not supported, it's because they have an unrealistic expectation of what teaching is like, and that's important to it's important to make sure that the expectation is being communicated in the classroom when they're going through their teacher preparation program. And if it's not, that's something that you as an LEA can do, and that requires kind of greater collaboration, on your part. And faculty, maybe be able to assist LEAs on attrition and recruitment strategies. They may do surveys of their candidates in their programs about they may do a longer term surveys in terms of how long that they're staying in teaching and what attracted them to teaching in the first place. So that's a potential source of data. And then the last thing I'll mention is kind of what I talked about earlier about basically leaning on the College of Education faculty to collaborate with undergraduate math and science departments to make sure that they are reaching out, that they're kind of communicating to the biology and chemistry and physics faculty that K-12 teaching is an honorable profession and that they need more candidates. And so I think that that's something that that should be leaned on. And if you feel it's like this is kind of uncomfortable, it's especially for CSUs. I mean, CSUs are basically responsible for most of the teacher preparation that happens. I mean, they're the largest entity that does that in the state, and faculty that are in colleges of education, they get grants and tenure based on what they are doing to improve teacher preparation in their state, and so they have an incentive to work with you to make their programs better. The next slide is this is also another often talked about source is retired teachers as an immediate source of labor. The next bullet, they're able to fulfill a mentoring role, and so this kind of as a principal, one of the hard things to do is to assign novice teachers a mentor and complete that induction program if you don't have enough senior teachers. And these are a source of mentors. And the average age of retirement, current CalSTRS data is about 61.5 years. So there's could be a fair amount of years depending on the retiree that you can get. One barrier to that is the earnings cap that CalSTRS typically allows retirees to earn. And so that is something that has to be approached on a statewide level to raise that cap. One LPI study mentioned that if retired teachers can contribute to their own retirement while they come back to teaching, there could be a situation where it would be revenue neutral. Okay, and then hiring. One kind of a common thing is the timing of hiring. It's an important thing to consider, and often LEAs have a week post have postings that are too late in the season. This is tending toward July rather than April. They can have weak hiring processes, so there can be lack of vetting or not enough time for teaching demonstrations, and this often is kind of reflected in a disparity in hiring. If we move to the next slide, that getting down to fact study that I mentioned earlier showed that lower achieving LEAs often have 12% more vacancies than higher achieving LEAs. They also have longer posting periods, so on average 11 days longer. Urban districts have longer posting periods. Rural districts tend to have shorter posting periods, but they all have more vacancies, almost twice that of urban districts. LEAs that tend to be further away from a teacher preparation program also have longer posting periods. One of the reasons that the researchers hypothesize is that just because they know that they don't have a ready supply of graduates in it nearby, they start to advertise early. And then the last one is that border districts tend to have higher vacancies because they're kind of a special case because they are competing with from districts in other states. So Oregon and Arizona and Nevada. As we kind of try to wrap up here, one thing that I'll mention is not to focus just on the quantity of teachers. I have certainly focused that on here, but also that a teacher workforce that you should be valued for its diversity and that supports a diverse population. Studies have shown that a diverse teaching workforce increased student test scores. It improves graduation rates. There's less chronic absenteeism, and there's greater self-esteem on the part of students. So, let's move to the last poll here, and I want to know what kinds of strategies your LEA has tried to recruit or retain STEM teachers. So we have some responses. You can select multiple responses, but you can also put some responses in the questions if you want to be more specific. So we'll give you some time to do that. Okay. And share results here. So just to see kind of an interesting mix. Bonuses, a lot of professional development opportunities, some using retired teachers, and then grow your own programs and local outreach. Great. Okay, so move to the last slide. So these are just some kind of things for you to ponder as you kind of go back to your LEA and kind of start the school year. To think about this issue is where do your new teachers get prepared? And the question about this is that you need to, at all possible, collaborate with your local preparation programs. And I realize that for many in rural districts, you may be quite far away, so you may want to partner up with another district or another county and kind of talk to the closest one generally. But the faculty at preparation programs are a great source of bouncing ideas off of data, and really know their students. And I think that this is in order to kind of better kind of fine tune the problem and fine tune the solution for your district. I think this is essential. The next point is, what kind of data do you have on teacher attrition, and do you need to be collecting more? I think that this is definitely worthy of a study session if it hasn't been already for your board. And a lot of the comments are general. I think in one study that almost a third of teachers left because of personal reasons, and that's hard to get at. But if you can kind of develop see some trends in terms of either compensation or if they're moving districts, if it's not leaving teaching, but moving districts where they're going to, I think that would be helpful, especially as you collaborate with your teacher preparation programs, letting the faculty know that to help to kind of arrive at some strategies. The next one is, what is your local CSU or prep program doing to prepare STEM teachers? Is kind of what I got at before in terms of how much collaboration is there between education and the science departments and the math departments there. The next one is, how do you use retired teachers? Are you just using them as just labor, or are you kind of letting them fulfill that dual role in mentoring? I think that mentoring role is especially important, and I think they're a good source of mentoring. And the last one is, how does your hiring needs reflect in your incentives? And this would be looking at your CBA. And so it was kind of a surprise to me that so few CBAs had math or science called out for extra compensation. And again, that may be folded into quote unquote harder to recruit areas. But that's something that you can talk with your bargaining unit about and see if there's some kind of accommodation that can be reached on that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation, and this is just a link to more resources that many of which I mentioned in the presentation. And so there's reports and some videos. Those STEM residency programs are available there too as well. But now I would like to take your questions.
Great. So thank you so much, Eric, for your presentation. For those of you that joined us today, when you registered, you had an opportunity to submit questions during the registration process, and we have a few that arrived as people registered. So we'll start with those. But you do have a section where you can submit questions live if that's something that interests you. But Eric, why don't we start with this question? And I think, we hear often the challenge of limited resources. So the question is, how do school districts with limited resources compete to hire staff in health technologies, computer science, and physics?
Right, and this has to be a statewide solution. I mean, especially with respect to physics and computer science, there just are not enough teachers in these areas. Physics often gets attention, but because it's part of A to G, but computer science has been getting more recent attention because of the new computer science standards. We have a webinar from Sacramento County Office of Education on this that was done last year that goes over the pathways to computer science credential. But basically, the number of computer science teachers has remained flat for the past 20 years. There's been about 3,000 since about the year 2000. And one good source of information on this is the KPOR Center that works on diversity in tech. And So it's really been flat, and so the state needs to make a Herculean effort in order to get more computer science teachers in the classroom. And physics as well. This is also something that's going to need to be a broader solution, because it's wealthier districts will be able to kind of hire physics teachers, but it tends not to be. It's not something that's equitable across the state.
Great. So the next question addresses something that you mentioned briefly in your presentation, and that is the value of a workforce that's more representative of the community in which they serve. And so I guess this question is, what advice do you have for recruitment and retention of Black, Indigenous, or other teachers of color, so that they can, be serving in the district?
Right. I think that one of the things that a district can do is give them comprehensive induction when they start teaching, and so matching them with a veteran teacher, giving them time to collaborate, giving them reduced workloads or feedback from experienced teachers. We know that teachers of color tend to enter the teaching workforce with less student teaching and less coursework than their white counterparts. And part of this is because of the popularity of alternative pathways to a credential, and because they tend to be more cost effective. And so as a statewide solution, one would be there needs to be more support for teacher preparation for candidates of color. And teacher preparation, I mean, candidates that go through teacher preparation are 2 to 3 times more a traditional program, or 2 to 3 times more likely to stay in the profession. And what these more traditional programs offer are more mentorship, more tutoring, and job placement services as well. And these things are really important. The other thing I would say is that if you have an HSI, a Hispanic Serving Institution that's close, that'd be something to kind of collaborate with your district about in terms of how to attract and retain those students as well.
Yeah.
Those candidates, sorry.
Yeah. I agree. I think there are also some indications, right, that district culture makes a big difference, so making sure that the culture is truly inclusive and valuing the voices, paying attention to things like, microaggressions and efforts within the district culture, so that kind of climate piece is really important for retention as well.
Right, right. That leadership aspect those school leaders are going to set the tone for the school, and that person is going to need to feel supported. And I think that's really important, Mary. Yes, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question that we have is, how should districts address STEM if there is still no common understanding of what a real STEM program or path looks like?
Okay, that's certainly a fair question. What I think the first call I would make would be to your COE, to your Office of Education, and ask what are some laudable programs in the county that you can go and witness. And if there's not ones in the county, then I would add, I mean, Alameda COE and San Diego COE are doing great things with STEM. Alameda, for example, has a principal's academy in science, and going to things that I talked about, that teachers need to feel supported in trying out new things with respect to NGSS, and just in terms of, and I think one of the things from visiting schools during the past couple of years during this project, one of the things that we found out is that that's part of what gets meted out in or talked about in professional development is what is STEM culture to be like? What is it supposed to be about? That we need to, prize, hands-on science learning. That we need to be giving more attention to math and making parents feel comfortable with the curriculum that we're teaching in the school. And and I would also say that the principal for this school is really supposed to set the tone, and the superintendent for the district as well, is that being a positive STEM culture. And one of the things that that you might want to consider is creating a vision for STEM in the district, and to have some principles that that you kind of abide by, and let things flow from that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking as you were speaking about the video series that we have on our STEM page now at CSBA, which features some, one of the videos is actually focused on CTE pathways. And so, for those, we'll share, we've shared the resources and we'll share a little bit about that, but that video on CTE is helpful. Plus there's one on the, as you mentioned, the professional learning piece.
Right.
So I don't see any questions that have been submitted during our session. So I think we will close out our Q&A, but I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and especially to those of you who contributed questions. And next slide. I want to thank you, especially to the SD Bechtel Junior Foundation for funding this work. During the 2018 to 2020 years, CSBA has been fortunate to have much of the STEM work that we've been doing supported by the foundation. And this funding has really allowed us as an association to develop videos. We now have an online course in the Online Learning Center and several briefs related to STEM. We have several more that will be forthcoming. And in recent months also, we've been able to produce resources for STEM equity in the online or like distance and hybrid learning context. So please visit csba.org/STEM to view the videos. We have archived copies of our webinars as well as the briefs, and we'll be updating those in the next couple of months as we have a few more forthcoming. If you're interested in taking our STEM course through CSBA's Online Learning Center, which just went online at the end of July, please email learning@csba.org for pricing and additional information. Next slide. You can continue to explore ways to implement and support NGSS through that Online Learning Center module, supporting the next generation science standard. This offers access to a wealth of resources to help you on your journey of learning. It's interactive and really reflective. Start learning today from the comfort of your own home office, as we're doing many of our things these days, or anywhere else you have access to the internet. And you get 12 months of access for only $300 per subscriber. CSBA is dedicated to providing up-to-date resources. We're on the last slide, or next to last slide, to school board members during the COVID-19 crisis. To visit our recent report on reopening schools, please go to our COVID-19 webpage at csba.org/COVID-19, no hyphens. If you are interested in attending future CSBA webinars, please go to our website at csba.org/webinars to register for upcoming events. And finally, again, many thanks to our presenter, Eric Hoyer. With that, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.